Hi, this is a demonstration of how to do the assignment in Photoshop. I set up the document to have a layer that's labeled Paint Here. And if you use that layer, you don't need to worry about painting outside of the canvas of these 4 stages. The stages are Notan, Value Groups, Shadows, and Lights. And we'll begin with Notan, where we basically give the shadow family a tone. So we're going to end up with the white of the canvas and one tone for all of the shadow family. I've also given you a very subtle line drawing layer, so you can work really on the process and not so much about getting proportions right. You can see here that the cast shadow and the form shadow are overlapping, and the edge of the creature here is getting lost, and that is totally fine for the Notan stage. Actually, that's something that is useful because it allows you to just see the whole shadow shape of the entire shadow family at once. Okay, that's it for Notan. Let's move on to value groups. So here I'm going to use 4 tones to organize my image. I'm starting with the darkest tone, which is going to be the cast shadow and the background. And then the second darkest tone is the floor, and that's pretty similar to the form shadow. So we can group those 2 together. I follow a rule here that's attributed to John Singer Sargent, which is to use the biggest brush possible and then put it away and use a brush that's 2 sizes bigger. My next value group is going to be the dark halftones. And then also I have a palette on the top, and I'm continuously updating my palette. So that is really representing the tones that I'm using. For the lightest group, I generally would advise not to use pure white. So I'm going to tone this down a bit, because I'm trying to show the average of the light family, the average of the form light. And if we're going to use white, it's probably going to be a bit too harsh. Here I'm refining the transitions a bit to show more of the general effect of the original image. Now, to save some time, I'm going to copy this stage 2 value groups into stage 3, where we'll work on the shadows. And I'm also bringing my reference image down, just so in the recording you can see better what I'm doing and what I'm looking at, and I can zoom in a bit closer. And now we'll work inside the shadows. So adding occlusion shadows and adding reflected light. When I'm working on ambient occlusion, I use masks quite heavily because it just gets a cleaner result and I have more control. I also like to use a soft brush because it gives more of the ambient occlusion look. I will speed this up a bit. Here comes a little reflected light. Okay, I think that's good enough. So again, I'm going to copy this stage over to stage 4, where we're going to model the lights. I'm going to start with a mask, just to make my life a little bit easier as I'm doing the shading or modeling, and to create a cleaner result. You don't need a mask if you're working in a different application and you can't use masks. Just work a bit roughly first and then clean up the contour. If you're in quick mask mode in Photoshop, Command I will invert the mask. Here I'm adding more of the softness from the dark halftones and then really working with a big brush. The shading here is very subtle. The value changes are subtle. And to create form, the most important thing here is to be consistent. For the value to change gradually from lighter to darker in a consistent way. And using a bigger brush helps to create that consistency more easily. Again, I'll speed this up a little bit. Here I'm cleaning up the contour and then using the mixer brush and even the smudge tool to make some finer adjustments. Zooming out to get a bigger picture again to see if the value changes make sense. I think we can push the highlights slightly brighter. And then just for fun, I'm going to add a little face to the sky. And I would encourage you to do the same and have some fun with it. And that's it for this assignment.